President, I thank the chair, and I want to begin by thanking the Majority Leader, Senator Reid, for being as steadfast as he has been in pursuit of a law that will protect America from what I think most security experts would say today, surprisingly, is the most serious threat to our security and to our economy, which is from cyber attack and cyber theft. And the Majority Leader, with the authority that he has over our schedule, has now called up the Cybersecurity Act of 2012, S. 3414, for reconsideration. That is to say, to reconsider the cloture vote that was held in August and failed to get 60 votes, much to my disappointment. I'm very grateful that Senator Reid now gives the Senate a second chance to do something to protect the American people from cyber attack and cyber theft. And Madam President, if you just look at what's happened since the cloture vote on the Cybersecurity Act failed back in August, I think you will see how urgently we need to seize this opportunity, at least vote to proceed to the Cybersecurity Act. Senator Reid has made clear that he would allow a finite number of amendments, finite because, after all, we're in a post-election, so-called lame duck session. The amendments can't go on forever, but a finite list would allow there to be discussion and to vote on the major concerns that people still seem to have with the compromised bipartisan Cybersecurity Act of 2012. And I will appeal to my colleagues in this statement. Don't be recorded as no. Say yes to at least allowing a discussion of cybersecurity legislation here. Offer some amendments, and then, of course, understand that this doesn't, we're not a unicameral legislature, to say the obvious. If, as I hope, we can pass cybersecurity legislation here, it has to go to conference with the House that I would say has, describing it diplomatically, a different position than as reflected in the Cybersecurity Act of 2012 that emerged in part from the Homeland Security Committee, which is why I have the honor of managing this debate, brought out with the strong support from my ranking member and dear friend, Senator Collins of Maine, and then working together with Senator Feinstein, the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Rockefeller, the chair of the Commerce Committee, and Senator Carper, who has had a real interest in cybersecurity. And as a leader on the Homeland Security Committee, we bring this legislation forward. We're being given a second chance to raise our defenses against the rival nations, enemy nations, industrial spies, cyber terrorists, organized anti-American non-state actors, and organized criminal gangs, international organized crime gangs, who are constantly probing our computer networks for weaknesses that they can exploit to steal industrial secrets, to take some of the best results of American innovation and entrepreneurship, take it overseas, and with it the jobs that come with those secrets. And, of course, to sabotage critical infrastructure, power plants, financial systems, telecommunication systems, water systems, and so on, which are the systems that we depend on in our society for our quality of life, for our freedom of expression. So many of them owned by the private sector and managed and controlled now, operated by cyber systems over the internet, and therefore subject to cyber attack. So that's what this bill is about. The bill is about creating standards for public-private cooperation to raise our defenses against cyber attack and cyber theft. Everybody you talk to in the public or private sector says today that we are vulnerable to attack. And this bill only relates to the most critical cyber infrastructure, whose compromise, whose attack, whose disabling would result in mass casualties, catastrophic economic loss, and assaults on our national security. So let me come back to what I said. The best arguments for this bill and for adopting it today, that is, voting on the motion to proceed and going to the bill, are not the arguments, frankly, that I'll make on behalf of the bill, but the facts that have occurred in the limited amount of time since August, when this initial vote to proceed to the Cybersecurity Act occurred. On August 15th, just 2 weeks after the last cloture vote, a computer virus called Shamoon erased the hard drives of 30,000 computers owned and operated by Saudi Aramco, one of the world's largest energy companies. And what happened as a result? As a result of the erasing of those hard drives, there was replaced, the data files that were there, the data files were replaced with images of burning American flags. Pretty clear who carried out this attack. The computers were rendered useless and had to be replaced and restored. Some cyber experts that I trust say this was the most destructive cyber attack against a private company in history. A similar attack was carried out on the Qatari natural gas company called Rosgas, and Iran. Remember the burning American flags. Iran is suspected as the attacker in both instances. Well, thanks to quick work, really extraordinary work by Aramco and many of the world's leading cybersecurity technologists and experts, the damage to Saudi Aramco was contained. But this attack could have thrown global oil markets into chaos and a lot of economies, including ours, into greater stress than we're already in if orders couldn't be filled or shipments made. That was August, 2 weeks after the last cloture vote on the cybersecurity bill. Then in September, the consumer web banking sites of some great American financial institutions, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, PNC Bank, and some others, came under the largest sustained denial of service attack in history. This is, I'm sure most of my colleagues know, is when the websites are essentially overloaded, they're flooded to make it impossible for them to stay up and provide the service they normally do. These attacks went on in different waves for weeks, knocking many of these sites that are very important to commercial life in our country offline or slowing them to a crawl. Just take a look at how much commerce is now conducted over the internet, and I think you can see the potential catastrophe here. These kinds of attacks really could bring our banking system and the economy to its knees. And again, some intelligence officials that I respect suspect that Iran or its agents launched these attacks against the American banks. Defense Secretary Panetta warned in a recent speech that these and other cyber attacks show that we are approaching a cyber Pearl Harbor, where, and I quote, an aggressor nation or extremist group could use these kinds of cyber tools to gain control of critical switches. They could derail passenger trains, or even more dangerous, derail passenger trains loaded with lethal chemicals They could contaminate the water supply in major cities or shut down the power grid across large parts of the country, end quote. That's not science fiction. That's not an alarmist. That's the Secretary of Defense of the United States, Leon Panetta, issuing a warning based on what anybody who works in this field know is reality. And Madam President, if you think about it, in recent weeks, we've watched again one section of our country, in this case the Northeast, including my own state of Connecticut, hit by Hurricane Sandy, and then a follow-on northeaster storm, losing power in some sections. New York, parts of New York, certainly New Jersey, hit harder than Connecticut, but we were hit pretty hard ourselves. But losing power, some still are without power, and this is the third week since the hurricane. And this is exactly the kind of dislocation and suffering that would occur if an enemy cyber attacked America's electric power system. And it's why we need to at least vote to take this bill up now with a sense of urgency in this session. Time's not on our side. We have to act. Madam President, the elections are over. The American people, through their votes, have told us in a clear and certain voice that they want us to work together to solve the many challenges our nation confronts. I know we're focused on avoiding going over the fiscal cliff, and this is another classic where the challenge to Congress is, can we solve our fiscal problems? Can we come to a bipartisan compromise before we go over the cliff? In this case of cybersecurity and cyber vulnerability, the challenge before us is, can we come to a bipartisan agreement, compromise, and we think we have in the bill before us, and create and improve our defenses before a catastrophic cyber attack occurs, as it surely will, and then we come rushing back to raise our defenses, as we did after 9/11, after we've suffered an attack.
Mr. President, would the senator yield for a question?
I will. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask the distinguished chairman, who just referenced the important word here, compromise, if he's spoken about the extent to which this bill reflects not only the original compromise, the bipartisan compromise between himself and his ranking member, Senator Susan Collins of Maine, but then a second compromise done to reach further to our Republican colleagues that is actually already embedded in this bill. And I think it's important for the people who are watching and listening us to recognize that not only was this an original bipartisan bill that was the product of compromise, discussion, and negotiation, but then a further unilateral step was taken by the distinguished chairman to move even more towards Republican colleagues. And so it's really not only compromise, but double compromise that is on the floor right now.
I thank my friend from Rhode Island. I thank my friend for his interest in the area of cybersecurity and for his leadership. I haven't talked about that yet, and I will right now, which is to say, following the advice of most of the experts, both political administrations, last two administrations, experts outside, our original, the centerpiece, one of the centerpieces of our original bill was to create a public-private process, government and people who live in these sectors of our economy, to draft best practices, not to have them imposed by the government, and then to make it mandatory within a set period of time that, and these practices, these standards would be general principles, not all do's and don'ts, to leave room for the private sector to come up with the best way they thought they could meet those standards. Now, opponents, particularly in the business community, some of our friends on the other side have said to us that they feared that that would be more regulation of business. Senator Collins, my ranking member, dear friend, is a leading advocate of regulation reform. But she said, and lighter regulation on business, she said so over and over again with such credibility and force, this is not regulation of business, this is protection of our homeland security, of our economy. reform regulations when the regulations seem to be too much and get in the way of economic growth. We have a threat here that is today stealing billions of dollars of American innovation, taking jobs elsewhere in the world. So, okay, we had it mandatory, but it was clear that we were not going to get to 60 votes. And, you know, I've said over and over again here that one of the problems we have in Congress now is that people seem to say if they don't get 100% of what they want, they're not going to vote for a bill. So I had to listen to my own words here. And because if you wait for 100% of what you want on a bill, everybody's going to end up with 0%. You might as well try to get done what you agree on. And so we took a big step, which was to make those mandatory standards voluntary. And then we threw in an incentive, which is partial liability, immunity from liability in the case of a cyber attack, as an encouragement for those companies who voluntarily opt into the standards that the voluntary process would set up. They get some immunity from liability for prosecution. Incidentally, President Obama has made very clear, first, that he totally gets the seriousness of this challenge to our security, cyber challenge to our security and our prosperity. And he has supported this legislation, but he has gone one step further now and said, if we fail to pass legislation, he will issue an executive order that does as much as an executive order can do to protect America better from cyber attack and cyber theft. The President does have the authority to issue an executive order that will establish standards for cybersecurity for all 18 critical infrastructure sectors under existing law and require those sectors to be implemented in certain areas where the regulators have the power to mandate such observance of the standards. A draft of such a presidential order is now being circulated, but the president doesn't have the power under existing law to offer a lot of the benefits that our bill would give private sector owners of critical infrastructure. For one thing, the president doesn't have the ability to offer the private sector owners the liability protection I've just described. In addition, needed changes to law that permit private companies to share cybersecurity threat information among themselves and with the government will go unmade. So both sides in this debate have acknowledged that this is a critical piece of any bill, but it can't be implemented by executive action. We're the lawmakers. We have the ability to protect our country better than the president does by executive order, but I have appealed to the president that if we're not able to act here, that he should issue this executive order. I'm very encouraged by the work done on it, and I'm confident that if we fail to act, the president will act. I think he has a responsibility to act, because if we fail to act, we're leaving the American people extremely vulnerable to a major cyber attack, and therefore the legislation is preferable. An executive order will certainly give the American people more protection. I have more I could say, but I note the presence on the floor of my colleague and partner in this pursuit, the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee.